Hello, YouTube viewers. This is Real Channel Turkey, and I'm your host, Atilla Yesilada. As I promised, we're going to have more guests this year. Hopefully, I won't have to talk. And I want to start with a country that, despite its geographical distance, is, in my view, very similar to Turkey, which is South African Republic. And I've invited Dr. Iraj Abedian, who is one of the leading economists of South African Republic, as well as being my friend for 10 years, though we see each other only once a year. He has served on the President's Economic Council, as well as in capacity as advisor to several high governmental figures and held prestigious jobs in private sector. I've been reading his stuff for 10 years, and I think the parallels between Turkey and South Africa and in general, the EM would be striking and pleasant to watch. Iraj, thank you very much for accepting my offer. And by the way, good health to you. Shall we start with your disease? You have personally experienced what this madness means. Explain to us, please.
Attila, thank you very much. First of all, for inviting me to your discussion channel, and I'm feeling privileged to be part of this conversation with you. My encounter with COVID happened literally on the last day of 2020, where I felt somehow weak. Energy level dropped substantially, so I rushed to be tested, and as it turned out, I was positive. And then, of course, I had to immediately isolate, lock myself in a room with all the sort of protective nebulizer, humidifier, all the supplements, as well as a great deal of rest. Luckily, I'm here. It took about 8 days for me to recover. I must say, thankfully and gratefully, I did not have those severe cases of respiratory symptoms, and that helped me to recover quickly. And I'm now fully back at my energy level. The only symptom left is my sense of smell is not 100%. It's more.
How the hell does you mean you don't smell the regular stuff, or just
Nothing.
nothing?
I mean, if something has got a strong smell, I have to literally bring it very close to my nose, and only then I sense about 20-30% of what I used to do. But I can enter into a room full of fragrance or other smells. I just sense.
How about Indian food?
Indian food. I've tried chili. I've tried all kinds of spices. I've tried all kinds of strong smells, positive and negatives. It doesn't do anything.
Yeah. Let's move on to COVID in South Africa and Africa in general. I think 1/3 of the cases in Africa come from South African Republic, but is that because you are the only country which is testing aggressively? Or do you believe this theory that Africans, having lived in disease all their poor lives, are naturally immune to COVID-19?
I think there are two factors in this context. One is South Africa is the most open of the African economies in terms of tourism and both bilateral tourism. And we certainly caught the very first wave from Italy back last year. And that got it going, and then England and some other European countries. So it infected our tourism sector very quickly. And of course, the fact that, as you mentioned, we are the only African country with widespread testing, that also records it. Of course, by international standards, we are not testing enough, but by African standard, we are top of the list. So those are the two factors. The idea of Africans being immunized because they lived in a squalor and they were exposed to it, that doesn't stand the test of facts. We have had.
It's a white man's theory.
Yeah, like exactly. It is, and it doesn't stand the test either in Africa or in India, where there are equal exposure to all kinds of unhygienic conditions, and yet the number of deaths in India as well as in South Africa are primarily African. There are, of course, white and other racial groupings, but by and large, the number of deaths we've had over 30,000, almost going 35,000 as of yesterday. And by far the dominant number is African population. So that theory does not hold.
I understand now your government is about to declare a lockdown or perhaps very severe restrictions. Is it really that bad, and has vaccination started?
Our severe lockdown happened last year, March to June, those 3 months. In fact, April, May, June. And since then, we have systematically relaxed the lockdown as the level of general knowledge and general compliance with the required protocol has gone up. And yet we now have the second wave in a really vicious way, very furious. The numbers of infections have skyrocketed. The number of people at the hospitals gone up, so much so that in some of the provinces, the entire health system is under stress, and they can't cope. But nationally, we're coping, and there has been a fairly effective partnership between the public and the private sector health system. As you might know, the South African landscape is very much a racialized and economically split situation. The private sector gets the so-called world-class health services. The public sector that serves the majority poor, or the services are not up to standard.
As
So
I
as a
said,
result,
just like Turkey. Go ahead.
yeah, and it is quite in a way similar. And in a way, many emerging economies are in that sort of broad ballpark. But be as it may, one of the positive side effects of this COVID crisis pandemic has been, since May last year, we've had a fairly effective private-public partnership where the government has brought in private sector capacity to create not just makeshift hospitals, but also use all the excess capacity that the private sector had. And that
That's
has
smart.
been
Yeah.
extremely helpful. As we speak, there are a number of what we call it field hospitals that are being set up almost as emergency centers for COVID uh, patients, who we expect will rise even further. And therefore, these field hospitals are being set up primarily with the help of the private sector to be able to cope with the pressures.
Nevertheless, though, another similarity is that, if I, again, correct me if I'm just saying wrong things about South African Republic, it has caught both your country and mine, Turkey, at a time of economic weakness. I think you already had a structural unemployment problem quite high, and a budget problem, and now COVID. I mean, how are you people doing economically? What is the government taking the right measures to survive this period with minimal damage?
Attila, you're so absolutely right. Even before December last year, before the COVID crisis, the South African economy had 10 years of systematic undermining of the economic structure and economic underpinning. We've had every institutions of economic governance under Zuma administration literally intentionally hollowed out.
Wait, are we talking about Turkey?
No,
Did you
we're
say
talking about
Erdogan? No,
we are
you said
talking
Zuma. I'm
about
sorry. Yeah, I think I've lost my my sense of hearing. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's right, and it has been almost unbelievable. And I must say, as somebody who had the privilege since 1994 to be part of building a lot of these institutions, like the revenue collection, the national prosecuting, economic governance, and a whole host of other governance, both general as well as economic governance structures and agencies, to watch them under the Zuma administration to be literally brought from hero to zero. For example, to just make it practical, South Africa had the cheapest energy source back in 2015-16, and had excess capacity, the cheapest per unit globally, supportive of industry, economy. The economy was growing at 4.5 to 5.5% per annum. And then the Zuma administration comes in And within 5 years, South Africa cannot provide electricity. The national electricity utility is bankrupt physically because it was drained out of fiscal resources with the help of the cabinet members and some of their associates. So it's been that level of brazen stealing and looting of public resources, not just in the energy sector, in the aviation. South African Airlines is grounded for exactly the same reason. And the overall fiscal situation is more than stressed. Uh, the the deficit is now, who knows, 16%. The public debt is reaching 85% and rising. So it's been a very sad, tragic before COVID, and then COVID comes, and the governments.
Allow me to intervene here. One major difference between Turkey and South Africa is that your institutions or the belief of your people in democracy prevailed at the end. Zuma is gone. And I
Yeah,
understand also the Guptas, who were alleged to be his crony family.
yeah.
What do you owe this resilience that Turkey doesn't, that many emerging countries really don't have? Russia didn't have it. Go ahead.
That's right. Attila, I think that that's such an important point. And as a student of this field over the past 40 years, one of the distinguishing features of the South African as an emerging economy and many others and emerging democracies is the if you like, activist nature of the society at large.
Yeah.
Not just a few intellectuals or a few activists. Remember, the South African population under apartheid had to
Yeah.
fight a long war of attrition with the government, with this institutionalized apartheid, constitutionalized the state machinery. So the society is an activist one. It doesn't put up with nonsense. It can understand it, and it took under Zuma about 5-6 years before the generality of people realized what's going on. And when it became quite evident, then you had a fairly diverse group uprising of people in the streets: the poor, the working class, the rich, the intellectuals, the trade unions, as well as business organizations. So that is different in South Africa, I would suggest. And of
Yeah.
course, the fact that we have a constitutional democracy and the constitution protects individuals. The constitution protects, for example, the independence of the central bank, the independence of the National Prosecuting Agency, and that provides the legal platform for a very independent judiciary, which is another distinctive feature of South Africa.
Oh, it
Um,
sure is. Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
uh,
Yes.
yeah. We've had a situation where our ministers and our presidents have been brought to the court and convicted and forced to do what the Constitution wants them to do. In many emerging economies, you don't have that facility.
No, I cannot foresee such a future for Turkey. Okay, let's roll to the future now.
Yeah.
Ramaphosa is president. I don't know what you think of him, but suddenly he was hit with COVID. Where is South African Republic going from here on?
I think South Africa at the moment is fighting a couple of pandemics at the same time. One pandemic is a COVID pandemic. The other pandemic that President Ramaphosa just about every time he speaks is fighting, and it's a big fight as difficult as COVID-19, is the pandemic of corruption that
Yeah.
was left as a way of running the country by the previous administration, Zuma and his team. And some of those guys are still in the cabinet. So, and as we all know, sort of old lepers change their spots very, very difficult. So some of those ministers who are used to running the show in a particular way find it very difficult. Of course, the more overarching problem in South Africa on that front is that the governing party, African National Congress, itself, which was once upon a time the moral guide of the society
Right.
fighting apartheid for over 100 years, it has become completely corrupted. Literally every organ of that organization, every leader of that organization is corrupted to the core. So President Ramaphosa has got to fight that pandemic to resuscitate, revive, and reconstruct the African National Congress as a party. at the same time that he is fighting the pandemic of COVID-19. And the third pandemic that he is battling with, and he is very vocal about it, is the fact that because of the 10 years of Zuma administration, the capacity of the public service was drained. Under the Zuma administration, we had populated the public sector up to 40% beyond what it needed.
So, wow, yeah, that's the wage bill problem.
The wage bill problem, and at the same time, lack of capacity, because all those who were capable, they were pushed out and they were replaced by a whole lot of yes men type, incompetent and unfit for purpose. So you have a public service that is facing the public health and other challenges, but hasn't got the capacity, and the wage bill is dramatically high. So one of the battles at the moment on the fiscal front, as we speak, there's a court case where the National Treasury saying, well, the government cannot afford to pay this wage bill. We have to rechannel resources from the wage bill to fighting public health on the COVID front.
You have very high unemployment, and some of it is not due to COVID. Is it because part of the population is not educated enough because of racial reasons or lack of resources? Are you running out of industries that would employ low skill level workers? And how does the future look like from this perspective?
Yeah, that's been the Achilles heel of the South African democracy. Remember back in 1994, apartheid left behind an education system was systematically designed not to educate and train the majority of population. So you had a very bizarre situation. 85% of population was not catered for and left literally unable, what I call it, unemployable. South Africa has unemployability problem as opposed to unemployment problem. And the difference being, when you have unemployment problem, if your growth rate goes from 3% to 7%, you for sure will reduce unemployment rate. When you have unemployability problem, even growth does not help, because growth wants engineers, wants technicians, wants controllers, financial managers, and the pool of unemployed doesn't have that skill profile. So there's a mismatch between the skill profile of the labor force as well as the skill needs of the economy. So that unfortunately has not been addressed by the new government over the past 26 years either. Because the government came to power on the democratic principles, and their passion was, understandably, their passion was to create access to education. Access was the issue, not quality. So a lot of political attention for almost 20 years was placed on providing access to get, for example, to say 100% of our school kids going age are at school. But what curriculum are they getting? What quality teachers do they have? What facilities do they have? Because going to school is one thing, getting quality education is what enables you to find a job. So that's the second problem. At the same time, the third issue came up, and that is, if you like, globalization plus automation, digitalization, and labor-saving techniques of production. A lot of our activities, a lot of our industries could not compete with China and with Southeast Asia. So the same problem that many other emerging economies face, South Africa also faced, where industries became uncompetitive under the pressure of globalization. And the fourth element, which in South Africa became very important, is key job creating sectors were mining for years and agriculture. And those two sectors became a lot more automated, digitalized, and also the skill intensity in those sectors rocketed accordingly. And then prior to the point I made, the skill profile of the unemployed is not suitable. So you have this situation that there are, as we speak, for example, even in the midst of a recession, we have tens of thousands of job opportunities, but for computer people, for programming, for engineers, for dentists, and yet we have millions of unemployed. And that is the mismatch between the automation skill intensity of the economy rising, but the labor force does not offer the same skills and the profile.
That's a huge drag for a country to carry on its back and a historical legacy, which is devastating. I want to ask whether South African Republic trades with other African countries, because I would think you would have a competitive advantage. I mean, I am as critical about my country as you are about yours, but I realize we're better than the Balkans. And I
Yeah.
think South African Republic is the jewel of Africa. But does it
Yeah.
translate into trade relations? Do you have an African free trade agreement, something like that?
That's what we do. We do have, and South Africa is among the top three investors as foreign investors into the rest of the continent.
Ah,
So our investments in areas like particularly financial sector, banking, insurance, telecommunication, mining, agriculture, these are really very, very strong. And increasingly, after 15 years of politicking and negotiations, eventually last year, in fact, the year before 2019, Africa, all the countries signed on the free trade agreement, continental free trade agreement. So this is the second year of sort of institutionally, if you like, at the continental level, promoting intra-trade and intra-continental investment. Trade is fairly strong and has
that's
been,
good.
but investment is increasing, not just from South Africa to other areas, but from other countries increasingly in South Africa.
That's good too. Do you believe in universal basic income, in particular in a country like yours? Or, I mean, what
And
if you don't? What would be the solution to make these huddled masses, as the Americans call, employable again?
yeah, I mean, to just as a matter of fact, even as we speak, 18 million of South African citizens, which is more than one third of the entire population, including the kids and the underaged, 18 million adults every month, they get social welfare. This is how South Africa has managed over the past 20 years to effectively prevent humanitarian disasters and all kinds of poverty related problems. So that's been, in a way, been as close to a universal basic
Right.
income that you can get because the rest of the population can take care of themselves. So, and of course, then attached to that are child grants. People up to the age of 18, they get a monthly grant. It's not a great sum, but it is enough to basically take care of their absolute basic necessities. Then a whole lot of other items like public health is fairly freely
Yeah.
available to the poor, and education is freely available to the poor. So there are mechanisms in order to soften the blows and the crushing impact of poverty.
And how do you rate the results? I mean, has it helped racial harmony, social stability? Has it managed to bring some people out of the ranks of poverty? Or what else you
Um,
want to say on this issue?
Tila, if you asked me 10 years ago before Zuma came to power, I
No.
would have said, wow, South Africa is a fantastic case with all the positive results. Housing improved, access to education, etc. Per capita income was rising. When the government got corrupted, a whole lot of these positive trends were reversed. So much so that per capita income obviously is fallen because the economy came from a growth of 5.5% to a growth of 0.5%.
Oh
A
God,
population,
yes.
yeah. So then, of course, then we have in a technical recession coming last year because of the COVID. In the meantime, as you know only too well, and Turkey has had its own share and other emerging economies, you get downgraded, so access to capital becomes more expensive and restricted. So all that sort of vicious circle, a spiral downwards. What has been the impact overall? It has certainly improved social cohesion. It has prevented massive humanitarian, if you like, suffering,
Right.
and it has in its own way helped a whole lot of people to become vertically or socially upwardly mobile.
That's
To
important.
very important. We created the fastest middle class in the first 10 years of democracy, before the corrupt politicians got to destroy a lot of institutions. Had that trend continued, Attila, today we would have been able to boast that possibly at the international level, South Africa has the fastest growing middle class on the back of proactive macroeconomic stability and growth promotion on the one side, and at the same time on a redistributive side of taking care of the poor.
Now, I want to move on to nature and climate change. Again, I don't know how much your country is affected, but obviously one thinks of Africa and one thinks, wow, climate change must be a problem. Where do you stand, and are precautions being taken?
Well, first of all, on the factual side, South Africa is the highest polluter in Africa because of its economic
Well,
structure.
because you have, industry.
Exactly.
I'm
You have
sorry.
mining, you have coal-based energy, almost 95% up until 2 years ago. So that's a fact. Are we affected by environment? Absolutely. Remember, one of the big job creator and economic sectors is agriculture and agro processing. Water is fundamental for this economy, both from a social welfare as well as from a production point of view. Even mining is very water intensive operation. Therefore,
Coal washing.
environment affects us terribly. And that has created two parallel trends. One is government has become very active, I think quite correctly so, over the past 5 years, and over the past 2 years particularly, to fast track alternative or renewable energy, go away from coal. Remember, South Africa is a major coal reserves of the globe, and yet we have to move away from that and become more and more clean and green energy. So that definitely is, incidentally, over the past 2 years, the sector that has had the highest private sector investment in South Africa has been clean energy.
That's very good, yes.
Yeah, and that's even from my little house here, I'm on a solar, and many people
Yes.
are moving away. Farming operations, commercial operations, they are all moving systematically to renewable. In terms of its impact, some regions are impacted more, but very importantly, the continent is very badly affected. And all the international studies shows that Africa is possibly the most affected in terms of not being the generator of pollution, but being the victim of, if you like,
Recipient, yeah.
environmental conditions. Yeah.
Okay, final question, and I want to defer to your experience. Emerging markets, everyone is so damn positive. But to the extent I read, by the way, Atilla Yesilada and Mr. Abedian work for the same, consult for the same institution, which has advisors like Mr. Abedian in over 30 emerging nations. I try to read most of the reports and I don't see a story. I mean, I could as well interview our colleagues from India, and they probably would have said the same thing. Do you find emerging markets attractive? And for what reason?
We have, Attila, an interesting dichotomy here. Emerging economies are not that attractive. But as far as investment is concerned, the developed countries are even less attractive. If you look at the returns and investment opportunities, with the exception of infrastructure in some of the countries, established or developed economies offer very little. Their entire economy is based on exports, but their exports requires that the emerging economies are functioning, and we get into this circular argument that who is the driver of growth at the moment. I agree with you. I look at South Africa, I don't see any excitement. At the same time, I look at the economic and social structure, I see phenomenal opportunities for investments,
Right.
for long-term investment. For example, for the next 50 years, South Africa can invest in 4 areas and not be able to meet the demands: energy, water security, urban infrastructure, and let's say health and education infrastructure.
Right.
Now, if we get in terms of investment opportunities, I believe emerging economies offer a lot of opportunities. Of course, for opportunities to translate to actual return on investment, you require institutional reliability, constitutional or some other forms of governance stability, and all the other stuff that you know better than
Well,
me.
yeah,
So,
political
and that's
issues.
the problem. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Iraj Abedian, my
Thank you.
partner and colleague from South
Thank you.
African Republic. He has been kind enough to spend half an hour with us. This was Real Turkey Channel and Atilla Yesilada interviewing Iraj Abedian. We'll soon be with you with new guests. Iraj, thank you very much. And I
Thank
wish
you.
you and your country the best of the futures.
Likewise, I wish you and our Turkish brothers the best.
Okay, let me just stop.